to our, thank you. So welcome everybody to today's webinar on best practices and policy for community-centric mini-grids in Nigeria. My name is Clara Neron. I'm from Rainer Lemoine Institute, a research institute that is based in Berlin. And we are hosting this webinar together with our partners, the Clean Technology Hub and the Green Work. This webinar is taking place in the frame of a project which is called Communities of Practice Nigeria. We've been working on this project for almost 3 years now. It's coming to an end by the end of this year. And the project is funded by the International Climate Initiative and the German government. I just want to say a couple of words about the project. Goal was to explore a bottom-up community-centric approach to support the energy transition in Nigeria. We have been working with 5 different communities of practice across Nigeria. We have developed an open access toolkit that allows community stakeholders to engage in developing their own decentralized renewable energy projects in Nigeria. And we have also explored the potential of community-centric approaches for decentralized renewable energy projects in Nigeria. We developed a policy brief that will be presented today. And this is also the topic that will be the focus today. I am going to guide you through the agenda. So you will listen to 3 different presentations right now, 10 minutes each. And I'm very happy that we have the experts here with us that are going to present some of the best practices and experiences they have collected with community-centric approaches. First of all, you will hear Abel Gaya from the Clean Tech Hub, who will present the policy brief that we have developed within the project. Then you will listen to Suleiman Babamanu from the Rocky Mountain Institute, who will present their benefit sharing model that they have deployed in Nigeria. And then we will listen to Frank Burke from Enrica International, who will tell us more about community-owned mini-grids and cooperatives in Africa. We will after that have a Q&A session of around 15 minutes. You're already invited to write all your questions that you might have during the presentations in the Q&A section, and we will discuss them during the Q&A session afterwards. And after that, I'm very happy that we have a representative of the Rural Electrification Agency, EED, with us, who will reply to some of our questions during a fireside chat. We will have another Q&A session after that and some closing remarks. We expect the webinar to end at around 4 p.m. Yeah, and with this, I will hand over to Abel, who is going to hold the first presentation. He's an energy professional focused on research and policy advocacy in democratizing energy access in Africa. Abel is the assistant project lead on the Communities of Practice Nigeria project. He holds a Master of Science in Development Economics. He has supported the State Ministry of Energy in drafting renewable energy policies and has supported rural communities in seeking project partners for solar electrification in Nigeria. Abel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Clara, for the introduction. So I'll just be sharing my screen. Okay. Okay. Yeah, so I'll be presenting the policy brief briefly that was just recently published by members of the consortium that Clara had mentioned. The policy brief is focused on community-driven mini-grids in Nigeria and is proposing it as a promising approach to electrification of rural populations in the country. So this is just the front cover of the document, which you can find on the René Lemoine Institute website as well as the Cleantech Hub website. And this is just an image of the content. So starting off, we have an awareness of the height of electricity, the electricity deficit problem in Nigeria. So we know that almost about 90 million people lack access to electricity in Nigeria, and estimates are that an additional 31 million are underserved by the national grid. And these numbers are cut across the country, but rural populations have significantly higher levels of energy deficits and underservice of electricity. And solar mini-grids, green mini-grids were proposed as a major way to bring these populations to electricity access. So about a third of population settlements that lack access to electricity in Nigeria have mini-grids as their least cost electrification method. And the number of mini-grids in Nigeria has risen from around 11 in 2015 to over 170 today. Just with the national electrification projects, under that project, about 175 mini-grids were installed. But then the predominant model, ownership and operation model for mini-grids today in Nigeria is the build, own, and operate model, where the mini-grid developer installs the mini-grid and owns and operates the mini-grid with some levels of community engagement. But then analysis done by the Sigma project in 2022 showed that the level of community engagement by these mini-grid developers on balance is underwhelming. So there are a lot of cases of inadequate engagements at the start, or engagement with only a few members of the community, and then not a lot of robust engagement during installation and afterwards. So this is just a snippet of the problems that were highlighted by Sigma after reviewing project sites, a few project sites across the south of Nigeria, and over 100 interviews. So as a result of these, community-driven mini-grids are being proposed to heighten the involvement of local communities and achieve a bottom-up type of electrification in Nigeria, or to add to the existing efforts through bottom-up electrification practices. So the definition of community-driven mini-grids ranges from a soft ownership definition, which involves community organizations that have a lot of involvement in terms of control and decision-making power, but they may not own the mini-grid assets legally or formally. And they play a role in initiating and planning the process, and partly in managing the operations. By hard ownership, we mean so community ownership of these assets, whether in full, both generation and distribution assets, or part ownership, which I will explain later on. So these communities create renewable energy cooperatives, and through that cooperative, it is that cooperative that owns, formally owns the assets, and there's a lot of decision-making power over it. So the case for community-driven mini-grids has been made across the academic and industry literature, with evidence from elsewhere showing that when mini-grids are being deployed at scale, especially through state-driven electrification projects and programs, there tends to be focus on the number of connections and number of installations at the cost of the long-term reliability and sustainability of these projects. And where developers have more power, there tends to be cases of, in some cases, unilateral or quasi-unilateral increase in tariffs, and then unaffordable tariffs as well at some points. There are also cases of communities having instances of theft of installation components, and very inadequate engagement with communities in terms of the human resources to maintain the mini-grid. So this brings us to the case for community-driven mini-grids, which is meant to enhance the rate of community-initiated mini-grid projects across Nigeria and even Africa. So the estimates right now is that about 1% of the mini-grids installed in Nigeria are community-owned. And this is, there's a data gap there. So this is based on a data set of about 67 mini-grids, which showed that only one of those 67 was community-owned. And we want mini-grid projects that invest in capacity building for the local populations, that are able to employ local contractors and ensure lower energy prices for these communities which can't afford to pay high prices for energy, and also the investment into community infrastructure. So this highlights the main differences between the soft and hard ownership. So legal ownership is existent for hard, but inexistent for soft ownership. And project decisions and responsibilities are high for hard ownership projects. And then mini-grid profits may be shared in some way based on the formula under both soft and hard. So these are just additional characteristics from the initial stage of work and initiation of the projects, which the consortium has focused on in terms of getting communities to be able to initiate and plan their own solar mini-grid projects, to be able to know which project developers to approach, where to approach in terms of funding partners, and how to engage with agencies such as the REA to proceed with those plans. So this involves hiring community members, creating community energy committees, benefit sharing models, where a percentage of the revenues from the mini-grid is invested into a community development fund to fund community projects. And this is an example of the shared ownership model under the hard ownership type, where the community cooperative and the mini-grid developer creates a special purpose vehicle, which then operates the generation assets, for example, and the distribution. So this applies in the case of an interconnected mini-grid. A distribution company, for example, a DISCO, then also owns and operates the distribution assets, and there's an agreement for usage there. So in this case, there's legal ownership or part legal ownership from the community through the cooperative. And this is just an estimate of the number of or the percentage of mini-grids in each country that is community-owned at the moment. So you will see that these are some of the largest, so these are countries with the largest mini-grids in sub-Saharan Africa at the moment. Senegal, for example, outpaces Nigeria in terms of number of mini-grids, and you'll see below percentage except in Uganda and Tanzania. So these are some of the barriers to the development of community-driven mini-grids in Africa. So awareness and perception of mini-grids, the technology itself, but also the potential for community ownership of the technology, but also among some government officials and developers. You will see sometimes the level of cynicism regarding the viability of community-driven mini-grids in Nigeria. And experiences from elsewhere in Africa shows that this is prevalent until the community-owned mini-grid project actually gets established and minds are changed. So examples in Liberia and Zambia and Malawi are key. And Frank will talk about some of these possibly. And then technical understanding of the mini-grid technology as well is another barrier, as well as financial constraints for communities to access the financing to be able to put down equity for the ownership of the assets that they intend to own. And lastly, in many of the countries where community energy has thrived, feed-in tariffs that have enabled communities to benefit from subsidies or credits from selling electricity into the grid have been important, but are largely absent in the African case. These are some of the recommendations that have been made to address many of these problems. So in terms of the awareness and the capacity to initiate mini-grid projects, we want a situation whereby communities, just as they are active in sending out requests to discos to come and repair their infrastructure, their distribution infrastructure, or to install a new transformer, or to connect them to the national grid. We want them to be also active in seeing mini-grid electrification as something they can plan and initiate a movement for. Another solution is that for unlike Europe, North America, and Latin America, where there are community citizen energy cooperatives that have federations across a country and across a region. They are known presently in Africa. So a lot of the mini-grid discourse in Africa is still predominantly, almost exclusively about private corporate developers, and the associations that exist are membered by those organizations. So if you think of the Renewable Energy Association of Nigeria or the African Mini-Grid Developers Association, for example. So we need to build a movement for that. Establish dedicated entities to facilitate and provide capacity building for renewable energy cooperatives that want to emerge and that want to seek project partners for. This is partly what we are trying to do at Clean Technology Hub, and to morph what we've done in the past 3 years with Spencer Institute and Greenwork into a more streamlined program that supports communities that are trying to pilot community-driven mini-grids. Yeah, so that also applies to the capacity building solution. We also need more agencies and donors to create facilities that promote community-owned and community-driven models. So this one example is the Zambian Cooperative Development Program, that is doing this by USAID, United States Agency for International Development. We also proposed or recommended the NEC to extend the scope of feed-in tariff regulations to encompass certain sizes of mini-grids in order to bring interconnected mini-grid communities into more active engagement. This also applies to net metering that enables excess electricity from the mini-grid to be fed into the national grid. Metering credits are distributed among the owners of that mini-grid. Lastly, we also recommended that the Rural Electrification Agency's 2021 framework for electricity users cooperative societies include more or clearer modalities and explicit modalities for community-owned and community-driven renewable energy systems and mini-grids. And also because of the skepticism or hesitancy we find with project developers who are worried about giving equity stake in mini-grid system to the community because they fear that the community may overemphasize their control and impede operational efficiency and decision making. So those kinds of concerns should be explicitly addressed within the revision of the 2023 mini-grid regulations, which currently does not mention anything about community-owned, community-driven mini-grids. And lastly, the policy frameworks for renewable energy, including the electrification plan that the REA is currently developing at the moment, should also include sub-targets for community energy and pilot programs for community-owned mini-grids that demonstrates its viability within Nigeria. So I hope I've not taken too much time, but yes, that is a description of the content of our policy brief, and we hope that you'll be able to go on the websites and download and read and give us feedback. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Abel. Please, everybody, if you have questions regarding the policy brief or regarding the presentation of Abel, feel free to post them in the Q&A chat section. And I will now hand over to Suleiman Babamanu. I'm very honored that you're here today. Suleiman is the program director for RMI, Rocky Mountain Institute in Nigeria, and he has over 14 years of experience in developing strategies for clean energy infrastructure and investment. And I'm looking forward to your presentation about the benefit sharing model that you have applied in Nigeria. So Suleiman, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Clara. Can you hear me very well?
Yes, perfectly fine. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here today. As Clara mentioned, my name is Suleiman Babamanu. I'm the country director for RMI in Nigeria. And I'm here today to share with you all one of the business models that we have tried out in the country called Sharing the Power Project, and specifically talk about the benefit sharing concept that we have on this project. Abel has mentioned some of the benefits around community-centric mini-grid in the country. So yeah, I'll just go quickly because I now have I think about 10 minutes to go through this. So yeah, so before going into that, just a bit about Rocky Mountain Institute, RMI. We are a non-profit organization founded about 42 years ago with the aim of transforming global energy systems to, secure, clean, prosperous, zero carbon future for all. We're present in over 70 countries. We've been in Nigeria since 2017, working across utility-enabled DERs, productive use of electricity, e-mobility, as well as community-centric mini-grid models. More specifically, to talk about the work that we're doing and sharing the power. And for some of you that have been to rural communities in Nigeria, I'm sure a few times when you go to these communities, you realize that these people need more than electricity. They need more than electrons flowing in cables in their houses. I know that electricity or power generally is a catalyst to economic development in these communities, especially when used productively. But a lot of these interventions must be deliberate around supporting communities to be, to reap the benefits of electrification. So the way we have defined community-centric models is really around sort of designing mini-grids in close collaboration with communities. And so what we're doing under Sharing the Power is to demonstrate the viability and impact of community-centric design and interventions for mini-grid projects. And some of the, characteristics that these community-centric mini-grids exhibit include, as I've mentioned, designing in close partnership with the beneficiary community, where they're able to also take part or full ownership of the business of the mini-grid, either through a legal representative from the community, a community cooperative, or power users committee. It's also very important that it's inclusive, where you have, and I'll explain this further, where you have community representatives in the governance of the mini-grid so that it is transparent and, there is inclusivity in the decision-making process. We have piloted a few projects across the country with some partners, as you would see on the side, in Akwa Ibom, Kaduna, Nasarawa, and Ogun State. The key aspects that that you would always find in community mini-grids include where you have community ownership, as I have mentioned, or co-ownership. And apart from within all of the benefits or all of the characteristics you would find in community-centric mini-grids, benefit sharing seems to be one of the most valuable when you speak to the communities in these places. Now, apart from that, of course, you have the governance structure in the sense of how the communities are being empowered to make decisions, and I'll explain this a little bit better. Gender equity and inclusion, and social structure to safety, structure to safeguard community investment, in the sense that how communities, how the investment are being safeguarded. But specifically around the benefit sharing is really around how does the revenue that accrues from the mini-grid profit will be shared with the communities. And then they're able to make a decision around what they can actually use those revenues to invest in their communities to their benefit. So why is this important? First of all, we know that it enhances the community ownership and engagement. When they have a stake in the communities, we know that they pay attention to the quality of the project. Sometimes they also participate in the development of the mini-grid. It also promotes equity and inclusivity in energy transition projects. The other point is also it drives sustainability by aligning development with community priorities. As I've mentioned earlier on, you go to communities and some of them would even open up and tell you that, look, we don't need a mini-grid. What we need is a hospital, a functioning hospital, or a water source, or for example, a road network. So this helps to minimize the conflicts by ensuring there's a fair distribution of project benefits. Now, how the benefit sharing, scheme work is you have, for example, what we have done in our project. And if you think about some of the grants that goes into mini-grids, it presents itself as an investment on behalf of the community. And I have a chart in the next few slides that I can, share like a process of how this works. So where you have the revenue accruing, the developers would remit a percentage of the mini-grid revenue or profit to the community. Now, this depends on the amount of investment that has been done on behalf of the community, and that can be calculated in a percentage of the form of the profit. And this shared proceeds can be used to invest into the community projects based on the needs and priorities of the community. Of course, on the social responsibility projects, developers also are able to carry out goodwill projects, for example, like street lighting in strategic locations in the community, or even power health clinics, or provide trainings to the community on different types of skills to help their relationship with the community. So the stakeholders, including women, minority group, must be engaged when you are carrying out community engagement. It has to be transparent in the design and implementation processes so that everyone is very clear and understands fully what's been done. And then you're also looking at inclusivity when it comes to the benefit, and you're making sure that there's no group that is being marginalized, especially when we talk about minorities, women, and children. And it also has to be sustainable. You should have a long-term sort of utility, and it has to be safeguarded. That way, you're able to reap the true benefits of the benefits. So this is what I was referring to in terms of the scheme, and when we talk about a typical mini-grid and how benefit sharing can actually be added to a typical mini-grid. You have different, of course, stakeholders within a mini-grid. There's a developer, there's a community, and there's a community power committee. Now, the developer, of course, as you know very well, he builds and operates the mini-grid. It provides his financing, whether it is through debt or equity. And then, of course, for the community, they pay when they receive the amount of power in kilowatt hours, depending on the tariff that has been agreed. It's paid to the mini-grid, and then the developer is also accruing the profit. However, you have the community power committee that we help to always set up within that community to help to deal with all of the agreements that you've established within that committee. For example, and Abel made mention to some of the REA projects, if you have a NEP grant that can be structured, for example, or if you have a state government that decides to invest in a mini-grid, this can form an investment on behalf of the community. That way, they're able to reap the benefit and can decide what project they can carry out within the community. And so, a typical example of what we've done in one of our pilot projects in Imbabiet, where mini-grid revenues will now be reinvested in the community. And this, I'm talking about a live project. So the community here is entitled to 20% of the profit from the mini-grids to be used for community projects. It's a cash-free mechanism to ensure transparency. So, you're not exposed to any potential sort of corruption within the community, and you're making sure that there's a very clear understanding on what is to be used with the revenues that has been accruing. There's a community reinvestment subcommittee that we help set up, that comprises the community representative, the developer, the partners for oversight and investment choice. And we made sure that these entity is registered as a non-profit that would help to develop a 20-year investment plan for the community using mini-grid proceeds to drive equity and resilience. So, for example, we have fixed members in this committee, where that includes the village or community leader, the chairperson of the CPC. You have the developer here, who's Prado Power and Farm Warehouse as a partner. And you also have revolving members, which is the minority representative, head of the women representative, and the youth representative as well. So right now we're close to commissioning one of the first project, which is going to be a water system, that would help to provide clean and reliable power to a community, and we're beginning to see the benefits of this. And it's supposed to be completed by December. I'll pause here. Thank you very much for listening, and looking forward to hearing your questions and further collaborations. If you want to reach out, you have my email, and I'm happy to share it in the chat as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Suleiman. Very insightful. I'm sure there will be some questions. I will have some at least. So yeah, everybody, please feel free to put in your questions that you might have in the Q&A section. And then next up is Frank. And I'm very happy that you're here, Frank. Frank is a senior electrical engineer at NRECA International. He's coordinating off-grid rural electrification planning and design of mini-grid infrastructure for electrical cooperatives. And he has experience in more than 20 countries, has designed mini-grids that provide energy access to approximately 150,000 people in Haiti, DRC, Liberia, Uganda, and Zambia. And Frank, I'm very much looking forward to listen to some of your experiences. Please share your screen.
Thank you, Clara, and thank you everyone for the chance to participate today. It's really a great honor to have the chance to talk about community-centered, community-developed mini-grids, and it's really something I'm quite passionate about. Although I've not been directly involved in the policy brief or the programs that are being discussed today, NRECA International, the organization that I represent, has been a leader in community-owned power systems globally for the past more than 60 years. NRECA International does quite a bit of consulting work around rural electrification and energy access since we were founded in 1962. To give you an idea, NRECA stands for the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association, and we're based in the United States. You may not know that actually the story of rural electrification in the United States is a story of community-owned power systems. If you see the map that I'm sharing here of the United States land area, all of the colored areas are community-owned electric infrastructure. So not investor-owned, not government-owned, but community-owned, where the people who take power from the grid own the lines that deliver the power. So there's nearly 900 of these electric cooperatives, 831 distribution cooperatives, and then 62 cooperatives that actually own generation and transmission. So that's high voltage transmission as well as power plants, with 20 million customers. So the story of rural electrification in the U.S. Was one of it started slowly and then happened quite quickly. So in the early 1900s, the government created a bunch of incentives to try to get private sector to electrify rural areas. It didn't work. None of the investor-owned utilities wanted to dilute their profit margin by leaving urban areas and working in rural context. There's too much land and not enough power in the rural areas for it to be profitable. And so in 1935, the Rural Electrification Administration was created, and the rural electrification rate in the United States went from about 10% to about 90% within 15 years, less than 20 years. So there's also productive use of electricity programs or demand stimulation. Financing was provided for electrical appliances. these types of initiatives that we're seeing very commonly now in sub-Saharan Africa. But I think, going from 10% to 90% electrification within 15 years would be a good outcome, for many of the countries where energy access is around 10% today in rural areas. And the way that was unlocked in the US was through community power. So now I mentioned about 42% of the distribution lines in the US are owned by cooperatives, and about 56% of the nation's land area is served by cooperatives, community-owned power systems. So NRECA International, we're a nonprofit arm of the Association of US Co-ops. And now we have more than 250 rural utilities around the globe, serving more than 160 million people in 48 countries. So this cooperative model, which is described in the policy brief, I think, as hard ownership. That means the community owns the infrastructure. It's not a committee that advises on the infrastructure. It's the community owns the infrastructure. It's actually a very prevalent model globally, including, in countries like Bangladesh and the Philippines, where initial pilot programs in the 1970s have blossomed into enormous programs. 25 million consumers served in Bangladesh, 12 million in the Philippines. The largest electric cooperative in the world is actually not in the United States. It's in Bolivia with 800,000 consumers served, which is quite remarkable. But it's been a little bit slow for this model to emerge in Africa. And although we're doing our best, and I think we can share some insights, we really encourage the policy analysis and the discussions that are happening in Nigeria now. I'd just like to offer my encouragement as someone who's seen this model work elsewhere, to try to underscore that effort and to try to describe, what that's like. So electric cooperatives are private utilities, right? It's not state-owned. It's private utility owned by its customers and operated sustainably as a business, where each cooperative member owns an equal share of the business, regardless of how much power they consume, and the business follows cooperative principles. So here's the first electric cooperative that we established in Liberia. Totoda Electric Cooperative is, other than LEC, the Liberian Electricity Corporation, the first registered power distributor with the regulator in the country. Like the Totoda Electric Cooperative has solar-powered mini-grid, solar and batteries. There I am doing a battery expansion for the system, and the system it started operation. The cooperative was established in 2017. The mini-grid started operations in 2018. So they've got 6 years of operating experience, and during those 6 years, the number of connected customers has doubled, and the peak demand has tripled. So we've seen tremendous growth in this area beyond really the expectations of the team as we developed it. I think many mini-grid developers would sign up for 300% of growth within 6 years. That's a very positive economic and technical outcome for this community. And some of the productive use that we see in the community, it's along a main highway between Monrovia and the border with Cote d'Ivoire. And so there's a lot of actually cold storage of agricultural produce. It's harvested, brought to Totoda, which is the only electrified community along this highway. Once you leave the outskirts of Monrovia, there's no power to almost the Ivorian border. So this is the place to get food frozen or chilled if you're going to sell it the next day. Then another electric cooperative. Now, it was mentioned earlier that Uganda has a large amount of cooperatively owned infrastructure. That is changing somewhat due to regulatory policy. But CREX, the Chegegwa Rural Electric Cooperative Society, was founded in April 2012, and in addition to more than 8,000 grid-connected members of the co-op, the co-op wanted to start its own solar mini-grid to demonstrate cooperative ownership of generation and self-sustaining infrastructure. So this is a community called Katirwe with a large dairy cattle productive use. So they had a milk chiller that was powered by diesel generators, and there's actually 2 dairy cooperatives in the town, and so the electric cooperative works closely with them in order to keep their milk chilled using solar energy from the mini-grid. So this is a smaller co-op. There's about 200 members, whereas Chitota had about 400 members in Liberia. But the system was commissioned in 2021 and has been operating, sustainably for about 3 years. I also want to mention that NRECA has a partnership with USAID, where we are developing 5 electric cooperatives in Zambia under the Zambia Cooperative Development Program. Last month, I had the pleasure of commissioning the first mini-grid, which is in Tatumbila, the Tatumbila Power Electric Cooperative. Interestingly, this slide needs to be updated. There's already more than 300 paid members that have paid. Power is not being provided yet. The commissioning is complete, but the lights on ceremony would be next month. And we have, more than half of the community has already paid to be a member of the cooperative, even before power is flowing. The community is very excited about this project. And again, it will be fully owned by the community. I'm involved, in the early stages as, technical assistance in developing the project. But the cooperative was formed in July of 2022. So they've already been in operation, July of 2023. So they've been in operation for more than a year. They've had, board elections. There's 9 board members. The board is, monitoring the construction process, monitoring the contractors in partnership with NRECA, and ready to operate the system next month. We can talk more about this maybe in the Q&A, but this is kind of the structure, the organizational and governance structure of a cooperative. These are the 7 cooperative principles. I want to touch on a couple of these. Voluntary and open membership. You can't discriminate against people. If you want to join the community and they're in the community, they need to be able to join the cooperative. Democratic member control. So the members are controlled. They cast their votes and have full governance responsibility. Members' economic participation. Members have to pay and be part of the grid, through their economic participation. Autonomy and independence, education, training, and information, cooperation among cooperatives, and concern for community. So I think I'm at time, but the cooperatives offer some advantages with local accountability, ownership, transparency, and lower tariffs generally than a for-profit model. They also have challenges. It's been harder to find financing for this model, largely because financiers are less inclined to trust the community, even though I would argue that the communities are the most invested in their electrification and the sustainability of their infrastructure, and yet they don't have sufficient vehicles for financing these types of projects. That is hopefully changing. These models are seeking to prove out that the cooperatives can be trusted. In addition to the 5 cooperatives that we're developing in Zambia, USAID is also funding the Clean Electric Cooperatives Program, which will support 5 cooperatives forming in Malawi. So I hope to maybe give you hope that that cooperative electrification is a viable model globally, and it's a growing and emerging model in the sub-Saharan Africa. And we'd be delighted to offer this experience to any of the emerging projects in Nigeria as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Frank. I already had the chance to listen to Frank's presentation a couple of times, but there's always new things, at least for me. I'm handing over to CTH to moderate the Q&A session. There are no questions in the chat yet, so to all the participants, now is your chance to address any questions that you might have to Frank, Suleiman, or Abel. So Desmond or Dosu, I'll head over to you.
Yeah, I think we just go on and start. Maybe they would write their questions at the end of the fireside chat, and then maybe we can take the questions then. Maybe when they hear the questions that I have to ask, it may prompt people to ask questions.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention Suleiman. I think he has to leave soon. So if you have questions regarding the RMI model, now is the time. And I see there is 2 different questions in the Q&A chat. So let's maybe do these now and then go on. Is that okay? Great. I will read out the first one. Could you give examples of split asset ownership models? For instance, community owns grid and private companies own assets, and the respective contractual agreements between the private operators and communities, if you have any. So that would probably be addressed to Frank, or both, I guess. Suleiman or Frank. Split asset ownership models.
I leave this to Frank.
Yeah.
Well, all right. Well, split asset ownership is it's a way of allowing for community participation without complete ownership. Even in the statement of the question, the community would own the grid with a private company owning the assets. It's a model that has some traction in the past. I believe there's several developers that tried that early on, although it's not a model that we've used in the past. I think the argument in favor of community ownership of the grid is the same as what I just presented regarding co-ops. The community is very motivated in keeping power on for their neighbors and participating actively. I think the assumption here might be that the co-op and its technicians may not be well qualified to operate the generation assets, which is a more complicated and specialized operation practice. In our experience, we have had good success with the communities operating the solar power plant and battery systems and diesel gensets. So my I would favor a pure cooperative model where it's all owned by the community. But if a private company is brought in to operate the assets, then I think we have to be very clear about what's the compensation model for the private company. Are they selling power at cost to the community? Are they extracting some kind of profit per kilowatt hour on the power that's sold, or are they paid a fixed, monthly maintenance fee for keeping the system running with some kind of a performance guarantee? The community shouldn't be, paying someone else if the service is not high quality. So there are just additional considerations there and additional costs that wouldn't be experienced in a fully cooperative model.
I think if I can add to that, and in relation to the Nigeria context, and the way the electricity sector is structured in the country, it makes it difficult for communities to own the grid. I can see that showing up, in communities where they're able to, invest in the generation asset rather than the distribution, for example, especially if you're looking at an interconnected mini-grid kind of place where the distribution network company owns the asset. However, it's possible this can happen if you have an isolated mini-grid where there's no existing infrastructure as well. But I have not seen examples of that in the country. To the second question around, is there an existing cooperative electric in Nigeria? Can more insights be shared? So I know that the Rural Electrification Agency usually establishes the what they called Rural Electrification Users Cooperative Society, REUCS. And usually this would be not restricted to like renewable energy projects. It can be grid extension projects or, rehabilitation projects. They establish these cooperatives and encourage communities to establish these cooperatives. And so they can use that as a way of either taking ownership or even addressing some of the challenges or channeling their sort of complaints to the Rural Electrification Agency or the government. It's a form of also a way of, if you think about the grievance redress mechanisms for World Bank projects, for example. And so that becomes very, very useful. For some of the communities that we have worked in that are not necessarily part of REA projects and have not established that, then we recommend and we help the community to set up that cooperative to be able to take a sort of a formal role and ownership in the revenue share, as I've explained earlier. But I don't know if you have anything to add, Frank.
Yeah, I think thank you for introducing that cooperative or electric users cooperative society model. I think there is some confusion that that whether that is a cooperative, a true cooperative model. And like you mentioned, it's helpful for grievance mechanisms. It's helpful for folks to get together and pay for the electricity that they consume and share their feelings or grievances. But it's not an ownership model, and so that needs to be maybe disambiguated in the Nigerian context. We don't see that in other countries. So when we come to other countries, we say it's a cooperative and this is what it means. But in Nigeria, I think there's step one is here's this user cooperative model. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about this one. And so that's been challenging. We have had discussions at a high level with NRECA, I'm talking about, has had discussions with the Rural Electrification Agency, as well as with AFDB, as well as with some state governments regarding a cooperative model, but we have not had success in establishing a cooperative yet in Nigeria. I would say we're highly interested in that, but the model that I've described here is not, to my knowledge, it's not currently active in Nigeria.
Yeah, thank you. And this is exactly what we're going to speak about now, also with a representative from Rural Electrification Agency, right, Dosun? We have also formulated some questions regarding this reuse and so on. So thank you so much, Frank and Suleiman, for sharing your insights. Everybody, if you have more questions, please address them directly to Frank or Suleiman. We will have also a couple of minutes left in the end where you can still ask your questions to the two, but I would now hand over to Dosun to moderate our fireside chat. So thanks, Suleiman and Frank, and Abel, of course.
Thank you, Clara. Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Suleiman. Yes, so welcome to the fireside chat. We are honored today to have in our midst a representative from the REA, from the Office of the Executive Director of Technical Services, Engineer Umar A. Umar. He is ably represented by the Technical Assistant in the Office of the Executive Director for Technical Services, Mr. Temileyin Oluwokere. I hope I pronounced that well, and if I didn't, I apologize for that. Good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon.
Yeah, and welcome to the fireside chat. So we'll just get right to it. We're hoping to end this whole program at 4 p.m. Nigerian time. So I'll just get straight to it. I don't know if you started the program with us. I just want to get your thoughts on the presentations that were made by Clean Technology Hub, RMI, and NRECA. Can you, based on those discussions and presentations that they had, I mean, we heard about RMI and how they talked about the 5 key aspects: community ownership, governance, benefit sharing, gender equity, and social inclusion and structure. NRECA talked about where they have done projects in communities, and what was quite eye-opening for me there was to find out that in the United States, all those the graphic representation that he gave of communities that own their mini-grids. So I'm just curious as to what you think the state of community-driven renewable energy is in Nigeria, based on the presentations that we made.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. As you have introduced, my name is Temileyin Oluwokere, and the executive director sent his regards. He wasn't able to make it because of some engagement in the office, so he has to attend to. Straight to your question, basically. I wasn't able to get the clean up presentation, but I was able to get to the end of it because I was just running from a meeting into the presentation as well. So sorry. And one of the key things I was able to pick out from the cleanup presentation of the policy basically is revising the established electricity users cooperative that we currently have within the area. I will still, I hope I'll be able to discuss further with cleanup so that they can speak to us about the gaps and they've seen in the rural electricity society, our the user cooperative society, that we have the structure we have currently and how we can improve on it. So it's a welcome development in REA for us to discuss that. And also to the presentation from RMI, from Suleiman. The Rural Electrification Agency structure basically for the REUCs, that is the Rural Electricity Users Cooperative Society, is also similar to what Mr. Suleiman actually described basically, because our structure is basically focused on sustainability of the project, community ownership, and as well as capacity building for the community members. So we have similar approach for the electricity users cooperative basically. Also for Frank, I want to say I was able to pick one or two things from Frank's presentation as well about the split assets model concepts that they currently run in, I think, in the community in Uganda, which can be a welcome development into the structure of project development models in Nigeria, because most of the time developers complain about, let's say, theft and other things that happen to their assets in communities. But I feel if communities are able to put in maybe their own resources in building electricity in their community, together with the resources or assets coming from the private company, it will give a well structure and good ownership for the community to own the asset as well and to protect the asset. So I think that's a welcome development. And I will be looking forward to speak to Frank more about this model and how they were able to get communities buying into this kind of model. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that answer. I was going to ask this question, but I'm glad that you have gone ahead to even answer it, because I was going to ask you what you thought about dedicating a funding window for electric cooperatives, and do you think that is an idea that is feasible in Nigeria? But I'm glad that we're talking about cooperatives here and how REA is heavily invested in making sure that these things happen. And so these are conversations that we hope that we'll be able to have even after this program, where we can sit down and discuss it. I'm really glad to hear that REA thinks that it's a feasible idea and it can be accomplished near term. So the elephant in the room is the question that I want to ask now. How is REA promoting community-centric mini-grids within its programs? So as a follow-up, and what I'm trying to say, earlier on in the year, REA had announced this state matching program under the REF, right? So I guess my question would be, what is the status of this program now? And what is the potential for local communities in participating states to take advantage of this? Because we have started work in some of these communities around the country, and some of the community members are actually in this event, this webinar as we speak now, and it would be nice to hear what the potential is, what's the status of it. I mean, this was launched in March of this year. So please, if you wouldn't mind telling us. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you for the question. I will take the first question first. That means that the question is basically speaking about what REA is doing in promotion of community-centric mini-grids, if I'm correct, right? For me, basically what REA is doing currently is REA has been doing a lot in promoting community-centric mini-grids through the various programs that we've been having under the Rural Electrification Agency, from our capital projects to the Rural Electrification Fund, and to the Nigerian electrification program, as well as even the which carries the energizing education program, and even the performance-based grant under the NEP. ARIA has been promoting these community-centric mini-grid because the communities are big players within for these mini-grids to succeed. Under the capital project, which the Office of the Executive Director, Technical Services supervises, one of our key thing is every community member must be part and parcel of this project. Be it deploying a street light, be it a solar home system, a solar mini grid, whatever grid extension, the community must have this society that is actually taking care of and looking after this mini grid. And we emphasize on stakeholder engagement, basically engaging the community, the youth in the community, the leaders in the community, as well as the women in the community as well. In this, we help to promote community ownership so that the community can actually own the assets, not like they own the asset as theirs, but as well as looking after the asset against theft and other bad vices that might happen to the assets. And as well, the community-centric mini-grids has promoted capacity building because most of the developers make use of the youth within the community as well to provide support while the project is ongoing. So youth are being carried along in the community to give them knowledge and grow their capacity in probably managing the mini-grid and as well in the project development as well. So ARIA has been doing extensively well in promoting community-centric mini-grids for our project. Also, your second question is based on the state matching fund, right? So for the state matching funds, the state matching funds basically is encouraging the state government to co-fund mini-grids alongside with REA to underserved communities. So it's just like, let me give you an instance. A community maybe in Katsina State want to have a mini-grid and they don't have the whole funds. We and the state government can come together and bring in funds to match funds to actually provide that support, that funding for that project. Maybe the state government is bringing a 70% or REA is bringing a 30%. The model has to be a structure whereby both parties are co-funding the project. And so far, the project is still in the implementation stage, whereby we are still engaging stakeholders, the state government. I don't know if you have been seeing most of our engagement with Katsina State, Plateau State, signing MOUs with all these states. These are the stage where we are engaging the state government, bringing them to the table, speaking to them on what this project is actually all about and how we can achieve providing energy to communities in their states. And as well as the state as well, bringing in an incentives to the developer because the developer actually needs assurance for their project as well under the state government. So the project is still in the implementation framework. Stakeholder engagement is being held with the state government. And from there, we will start, hopefully by next year, the project is going to launch fully for the state matching fund. Thank you. And for more information about the state matching fund, anyone that is interested and wants to know more about it can reach out to the Rural Electrification Directorate in the agency.
Okay, thank you very much. Which leads me to a lesser question here. So I've heard you talk about how you're engaging with the state governments, you're signing MOUs. What role can NGOs and maybe project developers play, in supporting communities to initiate and plan for this kind of project? So I hear you talking about state government. So NGOs and project developers who would also want to be part of this to also impact the communities and see how we can fast track this. What role can we play while you are doing this?
For me, for every, thank you for the question. For me, the roles of, I will start from the developers. The developers are critical stakeholders in development of mini-grids. And for as far as I know, the developers are so important to the Rural Electrification Agency because these are the players on the field that is providing these resources, providing energy to communities all over the country, basically. So they are big players in the country, and for every engagement that we've been having with the state government, developers has always been invited to the table so that they can be able to discuss with the state government through this medium of this engagement to ask questions of the state and what they need or how they can come into the state, the support the state is providing. So for me, the developer has a very critical role because they will be the one initiating the project. And for the NGOs, I think for the NGO, bringing the NGO into this conversation for me, the NGOs have a big role to play as well. Because in various communities, we have youth, we have women in these communities. So part of what the NGOs can actually play is maybe providing capacity building for the communities in various locations where mini grids are going to be put in place and with the state government. And as well as the NGO can actually support on financing of the project as well. Maybe helping the community prepare proposals and other things that they can use to approach the government or to approach REA or to approach the developer, how they have to handle their businesses with the developer. So the NGOs have a big role to play as well. And they can help even facilitate partnership as well with the developer, bringing them to the table and discussing the models and approach of what they actually want and how the model of their project has to be. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. This has been quite interesting. Thank you so much, Mr. Timile, for your answers to these questions.
You're welcome.
Some of the questions that I would have asked you answered them in your response to me. And so I'm very grateful. I do hope that immediately after this webinar, we're able to have a conversation offline to talk about how we can, work on seeing what we can do for the communities. So once again, thank you so much. And our regards to the ED. We know he couldn't be here, he couldn't make it. But thank you very much for representing REA. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. And for anyone that is looking for maybe to approach the rural electrification, the agency is open to everyone to come around to ask questions. And for me, I think we in REA will be interested in discussing with Frank as well in providing support for their rural electricity user cooperative society model that they've been using. We need to maybe they provide support to us on how this is being done. So it's a welcome development. I'll be looking forward to discuss further outside of this. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
And I guess for everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Over to you, Clara. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, okay. So I think we still have time to reply to some more questions that there might be. So maybe also Frank, if you directly have a question to Timile, go ahead. And otherwise, I still saw some questions in the chat that were also addressed to Frank. I think this cooperative model is very interesting to everybody. So the question is, someone stated, or it was Frank, who stated co-ops are fully private, but can the government be part owner in a co-op? Other examples?
Yeah, I think the model that works best would be for the co-op to be private, because when government, well, the only model I've described in my presentation was a fully private model where it's owned by the community and not by the government. If government were to participate in the cooperative or even to be part owner of the cooperative, that would be a violation of the principle of autonomy and independence. So you could have, in the best case, well, the cooperative just continues operating as it always was, and the government is a silent partner, maybe observing the operation of the co-op. But in practice, the government may exert pressure over the co-op, maybe encouraging the co-op to either raise its tariff or lower its tariff, to win an election or something, or to become affiliated with some political party or some other political party. And in that case, the community is not truly autonomous in terms of setting its tariff and operating its system. So at least in the United States, we really insist on independence from government. Where the government can participate is these cooperatives that I described in the United States were funded through public sector loans. So the government basically public sector debt was issued to the co-ops to build that infrastructure. But then essentially once those loans are paid back, the government doesn't maintain any ownership. But cooperatives do qualify for unique government programs. There may be government programs that are announced where only cooperatives are eligible, because rural areas have systematic disadvantages when it comes to many aspects of rural economic development, and the government may want to promote certain initiatives that co-ops would benefit from that investor-owned utilities would not have access to. That's an appropriate role for government in supporting cooperatives, but without owning them or without any kind of explicit or perceived influence.
Thank you. There was another question, and this is also linked to a question that I have. The question was, what role do the project developers play? And this is linked to a question that I would have also. Maybe Tim and Lehin, you can help out here, because from our experience, we had some talks with project developers, with different ones in Nigeria, and we felt that they were rather reluctant to engage in a cooperative model where they would just kind of provide a service and then step out of the project. So maybe you can share some insights here. That would be great.
So sorry, Clara, I didn't get the first question from you.
So my question was addressed to Frank in the sense that if he can share like his experiences with project developers, so what their role is, and because in our, like when we spoke to some project developers in Nigeria, and maybe here you can share your impression as well and your experience, we felt that the project developers in Nigeria are rather hesitant to engage in such a cooperative model.
Yeah. I'll go first maybe and then pass it over. When it comes to project developers, we work with a lot of project developers, for-profit project developers, but as a consultant. We at NRECA International, part of the reason why we can be so generous and we develop these projects and then hand them completely to the community, it's because we're a nonprofit organization. We don't really see the funding that we're putting into these projects as some kind of venture for future profit. We see it as purely focused on energy access, usually funded by grants, and our technical expertise is done at the service of the community, which is simply not the model of most project developers. So with project developers, our interactions with them is oftentimes they'd like safety training from us. We've operated hundreds of mini grids around the world, and technical or safety training. We've also done some assistance with reducing the cost of distribution networks. Many of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa have distribution standards that were developed basically for Europe. And in rural settings, you don't need the same. You could build single phase medium voltage. You don't need three phase. You can use single phase transformers. You don't need three phase transformers. There's many ways to optimize. But in terms of project developers, why are they nervous about community-driven models? I think it's just fundamentally because it dilutes their influence or their full control over governance. It becomes partial control, and their full control of ownership, and therefore profit becomes partial profit. It could dilute their profit, so it's a less profitable project if the community really is. There's a community fund. The fund, the revenue that goes into that fund is revenue that otherwise would have gone to the developer's own benefit. So yeah, that's I think really where a lot of the concerns arise from, and those are reasonable concerns. There's a lot of risk associated with project development in these communities, and a private sector model can definitely address some of the communities, but I don't know, there's not been a country on earth where there's been universal electrification through a private sector model, and that's where the cooperative model comes in.
Thank you, Frank. I think, Mr. Timilin, you have to leave. Thank you so much for your time. And he was so kind to share his email address. So if anybody has more questions, please feel free to reach out to him. Like, I would have a lot more questions, but I think I will hand over to, Frank, you're raising your hand.
I have a question. I have a question for Abel and for the team that developed the policy guidelines. As I've mentioned many times now, there's a significant gap in funding for community-owned and community-driven programs. I'm wondering if, and I haven't read the policy brief, so I'm sorry, but I wonder if you've addressed any of these funding gaps. For example, results-based financing is very prevalent in Nigeria for mini-grids. Is there a thought of maybe a different results-based financing threshold for community-owned versus privately owned systems, or what other mechanisms could give cooperatives a level playing field in the Nigerian context?
Yeah. So in the case of the specific financing facilities that the REA can undertake, part of our conversation within the policy brief was that the first, starting from the existing frameworks and the regulations that need to specify, make provisions, explicit provisions for community-owned mini-grids first, and then combined with external financing and donor facilities that specify a component. So just like the REA's NEP and the DARES program have specific components, a component for mini-grids, a component for productive use of energy, and so on. What was in mind was to have a component for community-owned mini-grids specifically. And I think it's also possible under DARES. Unfortunately, I think DARES is just, or has just launched deadlines for developers to apply is in January. So DARES has a tiered system, unlike the NEP, and that would have been a good situation to have tiering done that also includes a tier for community-owned, or a less stringent tier for community-owned mini-grids, and to create a facility for that. And that's, so in this case, the facility would provide subsidies for a community that has certain criteria and that has formed a renewable energy cooperative and intends to electrify, and the subsidy provides funding for a developer to build and then transfer ownership to that cooperative. And there's a component of that facility that provides capacity building for that, for those renewable energy cooperatives. But yeah, there is a 3-year program. We're hoping that at least with the state matching fund, we can get funding through state governments for community-owned mini-grids in the meantime, while working with donors to have the facility.
Well, I think that's great. I mean, I think it's great that the program exists and it welcomes cooperatives and community-driven models. I mean, that's more than I can say for many of the funding programs that are available to mini-grids across the continent, where community models are specifically excluded from receiving funding because the model requires equity finance at some level. and the community is not able to raise that typically. So having a program that's open to cooperatives is actually it may not sound significant, but it's very significant to have community owned and community driven models welcomed in a funding program. And then I would, just my suggestion would be, because of the unique barriers that these communities face, maybe consider a financing structure that in some way privileges community owned models as a way of incentivizing this type of ownership.
Thank you so much for this. I feel like we could go on and discuss about it all the time. But given the time, I would hand over to Dosun for some closing remarks. And from my side, I would like to thank everybody for presenting and for participating.
Thank you, Clara, and thank you to your team. This has been a long time coming, and we've been planning this for weeks now. And I can say that this was a success. So thank you very much. So thank you everyone for joining. And hopefully this will be a discussion that would continue even after this webinar. This is just the beginning, and we hope that we'll continue having more discussions around this. So just in terms of next steps and things that we want to do, taking out from this webinar that we just had, we hope that because I was writing them down, we hope that we can work with the REA to ensure that the recommendations that were made here are considered in subsequent renewable energy policies, plans, and regulations. We also hope to work with RMI, REA, and RECA to drive hard ownership demonstration projects within the next 2 years. Hopefully, we're able to do that. And then lastly, of course, we will be summarizing all the outcomes of this webinar, and we'll be publishing everything on our social media. So thank you once again. Thank you, Clara and the team. Thank you to Frank, Suleiman, if he's still here, and to Mr. Timile. Thank you so much. And to the CTH team, thank you very much. And that would be all from me. Bye.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon, everybody. Bye.